Well, this really didn't drive this series forward. In fact, since we didn't get another one of these movies for nearly 15 years after this, I guess you can say it put the franchise in park. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my channel and another installment in my Jurassic Park review series, where I talk all the Jurassic Park movies in the lead up to Jurassic World Dominion. And today we're talking about Jurassic Park III. So before we begin, let me know in the comments what your thoughts on this movie were, if you already saw it or if you were planning on seeing it, and make sure to hit that thumbs up button if you like these reviews, as it helps me out immensely by getting my content out there. And if you're new here, I hope you consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with more movie related content like the rest of this review series on a near daily basis. But let's not waste any more time and let's talk about Jurassic Park 3. This finds a decidedly odd couple with ulterior motives convince Dr. Alan Grant, played again by Sam Neill, to go to Isla Sorna for a holiday, but their unexpected landing startles the island's new inhabitants. Joe Johnston takes over as director from Steven Spielberg, and it's also the first film not written by David Koepp, instead being co-written by Peter Buckman, Jim Taylor, and surprisingly, Alexander Payne, each of whom worked on various rewrites of the script. Now, this film is probably best known for having the most troubled production of all the Jurassic Park films. In addition to the various rewrites, it was also noted that most filming days, they wouldn't even complete a quarter of a page's worth of material, and filming went over schedule by a few days. There were reports of actors getting frustrated, rewrites were still being done while they were filming, and Alessandro Nivola, who plays Grant's assistant Billy, even got bruised a number of times while filming. And it resulted in, at least at the time, the worst received of all the Jurassic Park entries, both with critics and audiences. And while it ultimately was a box office success, it still wound up being the lowest grossing of all the Jurassic Park movies, though it at least resulted in one of the most memed moments in the entire franchise when Grant has his dream aboard the plane. So we can at least all agree we're thankful for that.
Alan.
Now, while this is generally viewed as the creative low point of the entire Jurassic Park franchise, and it's not without its problems, I actually have a soft spot for this one. In fact, I think it's a legitimately good movie, and it's nowhere near as deserving of the hatred that it's gotten. This actually used to play a lot on TV back in the mid-2000s, and as a result, after the first movie, this is easily the Jurassic Park movie I've seen the second most amount of times. As I said in my review of The Lost World, I barely watched that film of the 3 Jurassic Park movies. It was always either this one or the original. And I always had a good time with this for what it was, and even on the most recent rewatch, I'd say it still holds up for me. Now, to get this out of the way, it does share some of the same issues that plagued The Lost World. Similar to that movie, it has too dark of a color palette at times, it can lack a little bit of that wonder and awe that made the first movie so special, and it almost completely lacks any of the meaningful themes that made the first movie so timely. However, the direction it ultimately takes winds up still being to its advantage, even if it doesn't replicate the exact same success as the first. While it shares some of The Lost World's worst qualities, it also takes some of its best qualities and runs with them right out of the gate. The film is a pretty simple and straightforward rescue mission mixed with a monster movie. I mentioned in my Lost World review that it felt like it lacked any sense of fun until the King Kong Godzilla style final act, which still felt like it was too little too late, especially for how tacked on it felt. However, this blends the best of both worlds from the beginning, making for a much more consistent film. There is a clear objective for these characters right from the start, which is to rescue Trevor Morgan's Eric, who's lost somewhere on Isla Sorna. And once we actually get to Isla Sorna, the film starts in right away with dinosaurs wreaking all sorts of havoc on our ill-fated visitors. We get to the island not that long into the movie, and as a result, it moves at a pretty rapid-fire pace, without things feeling necessarily rushed. Unlike the first 2 movies, which clock in at 2 hours each, this is only 90 minutes, and while it doesn't leave much room for any major character arcs or weighty thematic explorations, that also means the film doesn't contain any fat for the most part, and it gets right to the point, managing to find a way to be pretty consistently engaging. And I think having Sam Neill back as Dr. Grant was a big part of that, as he still retains a lot of the same charisma that made him so likable in the first movie. And already having that previous attachment to him helped make this a little more emotionally investing than if this was to be 100% all new characters. And there's actually a very big difference between the way Grant's handled here as opposed to the way Malcolm was handled in The Lost World. As I noted that Malcolm doesn't even remotely feel like the same eccentric, quirky guy who wound up being a major standout in the first movie. I did note he was supposed to be traumatized from his experience in the original and a little more cynical as a result, and I get that. And while that would be a natural progression for any character following the first movie, the way his characterization is otherwise handled, you could have changed the name and a few small details and stuck in a brand new character, and it would have had no impact on the movie whatsoever. It didn't feel distinctly like Ian Malcolm, and that was just one of many reasons why that film, in my opinion, felt very lackluster and generic. But I'm not going to rehash all that in detail. You can just rewatch my review of The Lost World. The way Grant's written, however, there's a much better mix of someone who's traumatized by the first movie's events, but still retains an essence of who he's always been. We see him give a speech on his book at the beginning of the movie, saying how he can't be convinced to go back to the island, and you can see how well that worked out, but you still see his passion for what he does and how he's managed to take what's happened and turn it into a learning lesson and make something positive out of it. And that makes him still an endearing character here without feeling like it's just a rehash of what he was doing in the first movie. Now, the only thing that did bother me a bit with where they took his character is that I didn't find it totally necessary they broke him and Sattler up after the first movie's events. Now, Laura Dern returns in a small supporting part, but this time she does not take part in the events on the island. Instead, we see Grant at her house at the beginning, where we find out she married someone else and had kids with him, even though she and Grant remain friends, and it just felt like one of those things that was done for no real reason. And while it's nice to see Laura Dern, and Sattler's cameo isn't totally pointless, as she does wind up being the one to save the group at the end of the movie due to her husband's security clearance, this decision sort of undoes one of the very few arcs that we got in Jurassic Park. Again, not that that movie was necessarily this huge character study, but one of the few moments of character development was Grant being indifferent towards kids, and Sattler was trying to convince him otherwise. And then by the end of the movie, he warms up to them because of Hammond's grandchildren, and with them surviving the island, they all get this happy ending. But then this undermines this a bit. Like, you see Grant has a bond with Sattler's kids, with her son calling him the dinosaur man, and it seems like things are going great for everyone, but at the same time, a big implication of him warming up to kids by the end of Jurassic Park was that he'd have his own, and that it was Sattler who was kind of encouraging that, yet he and Sattler are now broken up, so he doesn't. And I think it would have been more satisfying had we seen they actually stayed together and had kids of their own. I think that would have really hit home the progress Grant actually makes. But that aside, I still had a good time with this movie. The rest of the cast who joins Grant this time around, while not necessarily as iconic as everyone from the first film, felt a little more memorable. And I think what helped too is that while these aren't perfect characters who make the best decisions, they feel like they have personalities. Part of it is due to the writing, as there's a surprising amount of little comedic bits thrown in there, most of which do work and make it fun to follow them, like this one moment involving a vending machine. But part of it is also just due to the actors themselves enhancing some of the material. Like the Kirbys, the couple who hires Grant, they aren't exactly the most sympathetic characters for the way they essentially kidnap Grant and Billy in order to get them on the island. But the fact it's William H. Macy and Téa Leoni, who are both very charismatic actors, that goes a long way. William H. Macy in particular has always been someone who, even when he plays someone who's kind of a lowlife, he still finds a way to evoke some sense of endearment out of them and make them feel considerably more sympathetic than they should be. Though, not that I'd call this character a lowlife, but he is a little despicable for what he did, even if some nuance is eventually brought in later on. Yet, he makes him considerably more likable than he would have been had someone else played him. And then the other two main players are Alessandro Nivola as Billy, who is very charismatic despite only getting so much to do outside of one boneheaded decision he makes later on, where he steals the dinosaur egg. And then Michael Jeter, a very underrated character actor in my opinion, is also present as the leader of this mercenary team that the Kirbys hire. And again, this is a guy with only so much to do, and you find out he's not even really a mercenary, and he meets a rather unfortunate fate towards the end of the movie, but he still managed to make this role feel a little fun, as he sort of reveals himself as this timid guy who sometimes chimes in at the wrong time, or he'll just go with the flow. So he was another nice addition. Trevor Morgan as Eric also wasn't bad either, but again, he's someone who only gets so much to do, especially as we only see him in the opening scene and then not till the final act. And all we really learn is that he figured out how to survive on his own for such a long period of time, and he then gets reunited with his family pretty quickly. And All that was fine. It was satisfying enough that he's found. He's not a totally bland character, but again, only so much to do there. But of course, we can't talk about this movie without discussing the dinosaurs themselves. And as usual, the moments of them wreaking havoc are always a blast. And like I said, the film gets right into it with them as soon as we get to the island, with the other two mercenaries who initially joined the group getting killed off within minutes by a Spinosaurus. And the film throws a lot at us this time with them. We get stampedes, we get fights between dinosaurs, we get a few moments of the raptors showing off their cleverness, though with that also comes one moment that felt like a little like it was out of Young Frankenstein or something. And it comes at just a frequent enough pace that it's still fun while not also feeling too obnoxious and emotionally hollow. And once again, everything looked great and it didn't feel cheap or dated outside of the occasional shot here and there, which is just bound to happen. They use the same strategy as they've been doing with the first two films, where it's a mix of animatronics and close-ups and CGI in the wider shots, and it helps you immerse yourself in the movie once more. It might lack that wonder and awe that was present in the first movie, but each encounter felt heightened and you felt the stakes. As far as any criticisms outside of what I've already mentioned, there were two specific moments that I don't mind on their own, but the logistics of them bug me a bit. One is the encounter with the Spinosaurus from the beginning of the movie, where they see him again later on. The joke that it's the same one, it's done in a jokey way where we find out it's the same one from earlier on, as it ate one of the mercenaries who had the Kirby cell phone, and you can hear the ring from inside the dinosaur when we see him later on. And it's not that you just hear it when it's close, like, you hear it from really far away when it's completely digested within the dinosaur, but you hear it like it's right next to you. And it didn't even get broken up at all. It just so happens to remain completely intact. It makes for a funny moment, and it's one that's crucial to the plot, but it is a little bit of a stretch. And two, the way Billy's last scene is handled is also a stretch. We see him get attacked by pterodons and left for dead deep within the island, and yet, in the very last scene, as the Navy pulls up that morning to rescue the survivors, we see they already have a severely injured Billy in their plane. Like, they hadn't been on the island for long, and Billy, who was messed up bad and can barely move, was all the way out in the middle of the island, yet he's already on the plane, bandaged up, waiting for Grant and everyone else, even though it was clear the Navy just rolled up. I know this was a last-minute decision to have him survive. He originally was supposed to die in that scene with the pterodons, and it's cool they kept him alive because I actually like the character, but they could have figured out a slightly different way to show that. Jurassic Park III really is not a bad movie. It might not be as profound as the first movie, but it does at least bring back that sense of fun that was missing from the second film. Sam Neill is once again great as Dr. Grant, and the fact the film goes for a simple, straightforward monster movie rescue mission actually works to its advantage. It's got some great action scenes and a surprisingly solid sense of humor to go along with a reliable cast, and while it's known as a low point for the franchise, I find it to be a very underrated sequel. Jurassic Park III gets a 7 out of 10. Shocking, I know, right? But like I said, I've always had a soft spot for this one, and it still holds up for me. I know I'm a little in the minority on that one, but I stand by what I said. But stay tuned, as up next will be the first installment of the next trilogy, Jurassic World. And in the meantime, let me know, did you see Jurassic Park 3, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Do you actually not mind this one, or do you really not particularly care for it? Let me know in the comments below so we can discuss. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching, everyone, and keep having fun with film.